And I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Service Management Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the call over to Christine Garner. Please go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting today for the CA Service Management Global User Community. I thank everybody for taking their time and to come view the topic we have today. Today we're going to be going over a presentation from Christy Druzynski. She goes by Drew. She's a Principal Engineer Services Architect with CA Technologies SWAT team. She's well-versed in the CA Process Automation Manager and has a wealth of knowledge in this topic that she's going to share with us today. We decided on this topic because as we reached out to some of the local user groups, one of the things we kept hearing back is people were a little concerned, particularly those users who have CA workflow, the legacy CA workflow. You know, how do they get over to IP PAM, particularly with the end of life impending here. So we wanted to go over some of those topics, and another thing that we were hearing back is people were a little intimidated starting out with IT PAM, so we just want to help people, you know, get over that hump a little bit so they can move forward. So now I'd like to turn it over to Drew to present this information to you. Drew, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Christine. I see that you're passing me the ball.
Yeah.
Inside joke for the people on the phone. Okay, in just a second, if everyone can just confirm whether or not they see the PowerPoint that I am sharing.
It looks good, Drew.
Looks good? Okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending this presentation today. Again, my name is Drew. I'm a Principal Engineering Services Architect on the IP Business Management SWAT team. And today I will be talking about some of the best practices that we've encountered from a SWAT perspective on moving from CA workflow to CA process automation. So just in terms of the agenda, we're going to first start off by talking about what the future of CA workflow and CA process automation is. We'll talk about conversion recommendations and some ideas and best practices. Integration getting started cliff notes, because I know that PAM can be a little bit overwhelming when you first initially log into the tool. So hopefully by the end of this presentation today, it'll seem a little bit less intimidating. The CA Service Desk Connector, which is a component that allows you to more easily integrate with Service Desk and PAM. And as we go through this discussion on the Service Desk Connector, I'll also be walking through 3 mini labs where we go through and we actually create a new workflow process definition in PAM. From there, we'll talk about pros and cons to leveraging the CA Service Desk Connector. We'll also talk about some additional sample process automation workflow definitions that we provide out of box, starting with, I believe, Service Desk 12.7. And then last, we'll wrap up on where to find more information on this topic. Okay, so to start, the future of CA workflow and process automation. Our product management team sent out an end-of-life announcement on March 2012 for CA workflow. So within this letter, they have identified the date of December 31st, 2013, of which CA workflow has reached end of life. So end of life really means just that. It's the end of its life. So there will be no further enhancements to CA workflow, no patches, no enhancement requests, nothing along those lines. Additionally, we are no longer shipping CA workflow with the latest release of Service Desk, which was recently released as Service Desk 12.9. so it's no longer in the media. We are supporting legacy customers, so customers who already have CA workflow that maybe they're upgrading to Service Desk 12.9. They can still leverage it, but we will not be providing it out of box to any new customers that are starting fresh with the latest release of Service Desk. So with that said, it would be in your best interest to get your workflows converted from CA workflow to CA process automation by December 31st. For the reasons I just stated, primarily because CA workflow is no longer going to be supported as of that date. So you can absolutely run your current workflows using CA workflow, but you're not going to be able to get support from it as of this date. So obviously that's a risk. So we would recommend performing this conversion by this date. In terms of the future, we are moving ahead with CA process automation. This has been included with the media, I believe, as a Service Desk 12.6 or 12.7. I would have to double check on that. But I just made some notes here on what we've documented in our certification matrix in terms of the versions of CA process automation that we support with the latest release of Service Desk. So again, going forward, CA process automation is going to be the workflow engine of choice. I also wanted to include a link in this presentation for our latest service management roadmap. This was literally just posted as of yesterday. If you have a look at the CA Service Desk Manager product homepage on support.ca.com, and if you navigate to the product status section, there is a link there for our latest roadmap, which is dated October of 2013. Conversion recommendations. So how does CA recommend our customers to convert their existing workflows from CA workflow to CA process automation? We don't have a magic button for that. So in other words, we do not have a tool that will allow you to plug and play and automatically do the conversion. This is a manual process to get your workflows converted to CA process automation. With that said, we do have some recommendations, though, on things to make this process a bit easier. So to start, we would recommend doing some house cleaning. So have a look at your current process definitions and CA workflow. Determine which ones are actively used, which ones are not actively used, which ones stand room for improvement. So maybe there's different operators or different tasks or steps in those process definitions that are no longer needed, that may be redundant, and really take a look to analyze what can we clean up going forward. So it's the same kind of recommendation that we would propose to our customers when they're migrating from one version of Service Desk to another. Have a look at your current business process, see what can be cleaned up, and see if maybe you can leverage some new features or functions in the technology moving forward to eliminate some of the processes that you had in previous versions. So the same concept, I think, goes in line with existing categories or areas. So determine where you can clean up and consolidate where necessary. In terms of planning for CA process automation, it's hard to think this way, but we like to tell our customers not to think one-to-one. So don't think when you're moving forward with CA process automation that every single thing that was done in CA workflow needs to have a one-to-one relationship to things in process automation. So there are two different tools. They're very similar in terms of their complexity, in terms of what they support, in terms of what you can and you cannot do with them. So from that perspective, they're kind of on an even playing field. But again, since they are two different tools, we don't want to think one-to-one. Make sure that you have things cleaned up and consolidated before moving forward. Again, it's a good time to reevaluate and redefine your process definitions. So like CA workflow, CA process automation supports things like merging, branching, parallel processing. So take advantage of these features. So in other words, if you have a process definition in CA workflow that maybe you have 3 process definitions for the different types of changes, emergency, standard, and normal. So maybe rather than having 3 different processes defined for each one of those types of changes, define one and have the first operator and that process definition merge and have a look at the change type and determine, okay, if this is an emergency change, take these steps. If this is a normal change, take this other set of steps. Maybe the overall process is very similar for each one of them, except depending on the type of change, you might have a different subset of approvals for these types. So build it that way. Take that process definition, define your branching, define your merging, and really define those subset approvals all in one process definition. That will make it much easier to maintain going forward. Getting started cliff notes on the integration. So once you have Service Desk Manager installed, once you have CA Process Automation installed, it's very easy to integrate the two. Throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about Service Desk 12.9 and Process Automation 4.1 Service Pack 1. So all of the screenshots, all of the demo will be given on those versions. In order to integrate these two applications from a Service Desk perspective, you simply log into Service Desk as an administrator, have a look at Options Manager, and complete the Options Manager options for CA IP PAM workflow. So all this is going to ask you for is the host name for EEM, some URLs needed for Process Automation, as well as the Process Automation username and password, which is going to be the administrator of the system, and in our example, it's going to be PAM admin. So very simple. Like any other Options Manager changes, once you make these modifications in Service Desk, you do need to recycle the services in order for the changes to take effect. From here, I'm going to briefly log out of the PowerPoint and log into Process Automation to give you a very brief, high-level kind of cliff notes on the UI for Process Automation. So for those of you who are new to Process Automation, if you did not use previous versions in the past, this is a great time to start with a clean slate. For those of you that have used version 3 in the past, the UI has been entirely overhauled. It's completely different. So I know for myself, when I started working with PAM 4.0, it definitely took a little bit of a learning curve just to get used to the look and feel. Functionality, again, still very much the same as it was in previous versions, but just in terms of getting used to the UI, how do I look at my process definitions? Where do I see my running instances? That just takes a little bit of time to get used to. But once you're over that hump, you're definitely good to go. So in this screen, I am logged into Process Automation as an administrator. I can have a look at every component on the system. My Home tab will give me basically a dashboard view of PAM. Here I can create a new process. I can look at tutorials. I can view out-of-box content. I can look at my current tasks that I have assigned, process definitions maybe that I'm working on and I've checked out, and also my recent activity. If I go to the Library tab, this is where I can see all of my current process definitions defined. I'm not going to spend too much time here because as we go through the demo and subsequent steps in the presentation, we'll be spending a lot more time in this tab. So these are existing process definitions. If I move over to the designer, this isn't going to show us much because we haven't created a new process definition, but this is the area that I can use as my playground where we're going to leverage to design our process definitions. And again, we're going to drill into this a little bit later in the presentation. In the Operations tab, this is where we can view all of the running process instances within PAM. So I can see this neat little chart up at the top here that will categorize each one of these process definitions based on their current status. So if I want to have a look at all of the process instances in my environment that are currently waiting for something, whether it's waiting for an approval, it's waiting for a task to be complete, I can simply double-click on that, and that will drill me down and have a look at all of the instances that are currently in a waiting status. So the same thing for blocked and the same thing as complete. Here's where I set up my process watch. So if I want to make sure that I focus on maybe a process definition that I'm currently testing or I've currently launched it into the production environment, here's where I can do that. So this is going to be the tab that you leverage for all of your running operations or running process definitions. The configuration tab is where we basically set up from an administrative perspective all the configuration that needs to happen in the environment. So here is where we will set up our integration with Service Desk. If you're leveraging the Service Desk connector, we'll table that again to a few more slides later in the presentation. But here is where we configure our domain, our orchestrators, our EEM server, our different modules or different existing connectors in the system. And finally, our reports tab, which is going to give us reports on our existing running or defined process definitions. So again, that was very brief, but just a very high-level introduction to what the new UI looks like as of PAM 4.0. So from an integration perspective, the first thing that I would like to talk about today is the Service Desk connector. So to start, what is it? The Service Desk connector provides easy-to-use operators, allowing you to quickly build an integrated process flow in PAM. So to step back a little bit, what this basically means is we provide, with the Service Desk connector, a number of different operators that basically wrap the complexity of the web services, allowing you to very quickly and very easily build a process definition. And we're going to be leveraging this connector when we go through the lab section, and you'll be able to see what I mean. So how do you obtain the Service Desk connector? Right now, we are in the middle of getting this media posted to the Service Desk Manager homepage on support.ca.com. So we should be getting that posted soon. In the interim, if you are licensed for CA Service Catalog, you have the ability to download the connector from the Service Catalog product download section on support.ca.com. So I've included a screenshot of where this can be downloaded from. Again, the product download section, and you want to look for the ISO that says CA Process Automation Connectors for CA products. And from there, you can run the installer, and the connector for Service Desk will be installed. Before I go ahead, are there any questions thus far on the presentation?
And if you would like to ask a question, press star 1. And we have a question from Raleigh Mansky.
Okay.
Hi, Drew.
Good morning.
I understand that support for the CA workflow end of life is December 31st this year. Will the functionality of the CA workflow continue to be part of SDM, or is there some point in time when that functionality will be removed from SDM as well?
Well, I know that, to answer your question, I know that for Service Desk 12.9, we no longer ship.
Right, but we're an existing customer. So we're an existing customer, have been for a long time. And we have a lot of workflows. And we know how to set them up and use them and whatnot. So I'm just wondering, is the functionality at some point in the future going to be removed? So how long do we have, really?
I know for the life of Service Desk Manager 12.9, it's to my understanding that you can still run CA workflow. So you can take your existing processes and you should run okay. The issue that you're going to encounter, though, is as of that end-of-life date, the product is deemed end-of-life no longer supported. So if you're running in your production environment with a lot of these business-critical workflows, if you encounter an issue,
right,
you won't get support for it. So that's a risk of running with it. It doesn't mean to say that it's not going to work, but if you have an issue, I would hate to have you be at a standstill.
Yeah, but and we understand that. We understand that the support is ending, but there isn't any way that we'd be able to convert these by end of this year. So what I'm hearing you say is in 12.9, the workflows are still going to be there. The functionality is going to be there. We're just not going to have the support, but the functionality will still be there.
Right.
But my question is, do you know, is there some point in the future when the functionality will be totally gone? So we do an upgrade to 12.10 or 13, and then the functionality is not there. Do you know, is that planned, or is the functionality still going to be there? It's just that there's no support.
For an exact answer, I would have to table that and get back to you, which I'm absolutely happy to do. The only thing I would be concerned about that going forward is if we consider CA workflow to be end of life as of December 31st. When any new releases of Service Desk come out, I can't say for certain that, well, I can probably say for certain that there will be no testing to see if CA workflow was compatible with that version, so it may not be compatible with future releases of Service Desk. So I'm guessing that's going to be answered, but either way, just to be certain, I'll double check on that. But I would say that after Service Desk 12.9, it's very likely that the answer to that will be no.
Okay, after 12.9, probably not. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
But like I said, I'll double check on that, and I'll confirm, and I'll have Christine send out an email, or I'll get back with Christine following this call today.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, no problem.
And we have no further questions.
Okay, so getting back to the Service Desk connector. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about how to integrate Service Desk and PAM from a Service Desk perspective, which simply involves going into Options Manager, telling Service Desk where EEM is, and then telling Service Desk where PAM is. So now we're taking the flip side, and we are now in Support Automation, and we're talking about how to integrate Support Automation with Service Desk. So if, and the keyword here being if, you are using the Service Desk connector, this is the screen where you would integrate the two applications. So you go into the UI as an administrator, go to the Configuration tab, look at the modules for your domain, and again, this is all highlighted with pretty arrows in the presentation. Have a look at the Service Desk module, and this is the configuration option for the Service Desk connector. Within here, you will enter in the Web Services URL for Service Desk and the Web Services username and password. So this entire integration is Web Services driven. When we talk about building a process definition later in the presentation, we'll talk about how Web Services is leveraged, but it's all going to be leveraged using this URL to the WSDL and this administrative username and password. When you install the connector, the operators that are highlighted in yellow is what it provides. So these are basically, can be viewed as little mini building blocks to view your process definition. So you can do things like attach a change order to an existing request, create a new request, change an assignee for a change order, make an update to a change order. These are literally plug and play. It is so simple to use, and it's so simple in fact that we can make it through a lab in a 2-hour presentation. But in order to view any operators, when you're creating a new process definition, you have to make sure that you navigate to the View menu and you highlight operators. Otherwise, these do not show up by default. So make sure that you're doing that as you're building your process definition. So now let's try it. So as a part of this lab, we are going to build a simple process, and it's so simple that it literally has one operator. It will do one and only one thing. But hopefully this will be enough for you to be able to create a new process definition very easily and remove that intimidation factor of trying to get used to using process automation. So we'll start off with phase one. Phase one is going to be creating and running a very simple process, again, with one operator within process automation. We really won't be hitting Service Desk apart from this operator logging a comment within a change order. From there, we will run this same process using a start request form within PAM. And a start request form is key to the integration between Service Desk and PAM. The third phase is going to be to run this process from a start request form that we attach to a category in Service Desk Manager. So we're going to start very simple and then ultimately show you how to run this process definition within Service Desk. So I'm going to now log out of my presentation and go into PAM. For those of you who happen to have access to an environment on your laptops right now that you have the two products integrated, you have the connector installed and configured, feel free to follow along with me. And if you have any questions along the way, again, feel free to let me know. So I have created a folder here, User Community Live, where I am going to be creating this new process definition. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to New, and I'm going to create a process. And we are going to call this test underscore process 1. Very easy. I now have my very first process definition defined. So I'm going to double click, and when I open up the process definition, I instantly have a start and end nodes defined. I want to leverage the Service Desk connector when I'm building out my process definition. So again, I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to select Operators. If I navigate down to CA Service Desk, we can see all of the connectors that I was just discussing. And the one connector, the one operator within the connector that we're going to use is log change order comments. So all I'm going to do is highlight this, and I'm going to drag it over and drop it into my process definition. From here, I'm just going to connect my start and my end. So very simple. I already have this process definition built. From here, I need to tell the system how I want it to interact with Service Desk. So because we already have the connector configured, the system already knows where the Service Desk environment is, and it knows how to log into it using web services. So all I need to do is pass it the change order number that I would like to have an activity log commented to, and what the comments are that I want to add to the activity log. So for right now, just to get through our very minimal time frame, I'm going to hard code this and enter in a physical change order number. But if you were building your process definition, obviously this would be very unrealistic. Here you would have to include the purse ID, the variable that represents the purse ID for this field, just to make sure that you're updating whatever process definition that you're running in context of this workflow. Again, but I'm going to hard code this to a change order that I know is already existing in the environment. And because this is a string, this needs to be delimited by single quotes. Okay, so far so good. Looks like we have this thing built, so all I need to do is save it. And make sure that you also check it in. So to check it in is this little kind of tubular icon with a green arrow. So we're going to check in the process definition, and now we can run it. So in order to run it, I'm just going to go over here to our Start button. Say, yes, I absolutely want to monitor the new instance. And it's completed. So since it has no error messages, we can easily go into Service Desk and see if our change order has been updated. So if I have a look at the change order number that we hard-coded, change order number 806, I can see that we have an activity log entered from 11:34 a.m., which is just a minute ago, via this workflow with a comment that I logged. So very easy. Using the connector, I was able to create a process definition that interacts with Service Desk in about a matter of 2 minutes. So this makes it very easy. Okay, so that completes phase 1, is creating and running this within PAM. So now phase 2, as I mentioned, is to run this process definition from a start request form. So a start request form is going to be a key component that allows you to integrate, or to attach, I should say, any process definitions to a change category in Service Desk. That's going to be the key piece that ties this together. So in order to run any process definitions from within Service Desk, you have to have this piece. So I made a note in the presentation here to copy. I never start from scratch unless I absolutely have to. I definitely like to make use of any existing, whether it's process definitions or start request forms, in order to leverage, just to remove the time from starting from scratch. So I'm just going to take an existing start request form, and I'm going to copy it into my folder for use. So the first thing I'm going to do is rename this, and we're going to call it Test Process SRF. When I double-click on the Start Request form, I can have a look at all of the properties. So the 2 key pieces that I'm going to need in my Start Request form in order to integrate with Service Desk is going to be the label, which is a simple text field, and the purse ID. We need the purse ID because anytime we run a process definition, we want to put it in context of the change order that's going to be invoking it. Now, if I go over to my Properties tab, here's where we tell it what the object name is, and we also tell it the process path. So here's where we're going to tell our Start Request form, go ahead, fetch this process, and attach it. So here we're going to attach our test process 1. So I can enter in my description and also my tags. This field is very important. What this tag field does is this is the delimiter that will tell Service Desk, is this process definition something that should be invoked via change, via incident, via request, or via problem. These are all tags that are used as keywords. So for example, if I'm going to be using this process definition specific to a change order in a change category, then I want to enter in the tag of change. If I want this specific to a request, incident, or problem, then I could add in a tag of PCAT here, which is going to represent request, incident, or problem area. But for right now, we're just going to be using this for a change. So I'm going to save the SRF and check it in. Now, if I navigate back to our library, I can go to our Start Request form, right mouse click on it, and then go to Start. So this is going to kick it off. For our label, I'm just going to enter in test. For our purse ID, I'm going to enter in what I already know to be the purse ID of change order 806, which I obtained by just running a simple query through PDM extract. So I'm going to enter in change 40089. And this is what's going to tell the system that run this process definition and run it in context of change order 806. I hit finish. I can log into my operations tab. I can view the process instance, make sure that it didn't fail with any error messages, but it looks to be okay. So now I can go back into change order 806, refresh my screen, go to our logs tab, and I see a log comment, again, with a timestamp of 11:40, which was a minute ago, with the comment that I had entered in when I was defining the process. So it works. So the next phase is going to be attaching this start request form to a change category in Service Desk so that you can run it from within Service Desk. But before I do that, I'll pause here to see if anybody has any questions on what I've done so far.
And to ask a question, press *1. And you have a question from Brett Zipkin.
Hi, Brett.
Hi. When you linked the SRF to the category, did the purse ID that you filled in override what you had hard-coded in the definition?
You just ruined the lab.
Sorry.
No, I'm just messing with you. That's actually one of the things that we're going to talk about in the next phase because we did hard-code it. So unless I change that hard-coding for it to be a variable of just a purse ID, it's going to always log a comment just specific to this change order. But it won't override it. So actually let me go back because this is a really good question. I'll go back and I'll go into my process definition. Okay, so you know how we configured the Service Desk module, and that's where we did the integration with the Service Desk connector, and that was where we entered in the web services URL and then the username and password. So normally that information from that module gets ported over into any of these operations here. They're using the Service Desk connector. So if I navigate here to these other properties, the Service Desk Connect parameters, these are all blank because they're actually taking that information from the Service Desk module. But if I was to type in, oh, it's not typing because I have the process definition checked in and I can't change it. But if I was typing something here for the Service Desk URL, if I pointed it to a different URL, this URL trumps what was defined in the module. So anything that's defined here is going to overwrite your module properties. The same thing applies for the Service Desk basic parameter. So since I've hard-coded change order number 806, when and we'll do this as the next phase in the lab, but when I attach my start request form to the change category, and then I open up a new change order against that category, this process definition will run, and it will complete without errors. It will go flawlessly, except it won't log an activity to the new change order we opened up. It will log it to change order number 806 because it's hard-coded. So again, any of the parameters that are here trumps anything that we pass to it. So Brett, does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
And you have a question from Robert Emerson.
Hi, Robert.
Hello. It was the same question, so that's fine.
Okay.
And there are no further questions.
Okay, so for the next phase in the lab, we are going to attach a start request form to our change category. So I'm going to go into Service Desk, change orders, and I will create a new category for this lab. save our change category, and then I will attach our process definition to it. So I'll go back into edit mode. And now since I have already integrated with service, since I've already integrated service desk with PAM, I have access to this use IP PAM button. If you do not have your options manager options defined for CA process automation, or you have them defined and they're wrong or there's an error message, this button will be read-only. But because I have them integrated, I'm going to click on Use IP PAM. And now this will give me a list of all of the start request forms in my environment that have that change cat keyword defined. So in this list, I won't be able to see any of the process definitions that are only specific to request incidents and problems. So that keyword literally ties that process definition to be accessible via change orders. So we'll go to my next page and I'll find the start request form that we just defined under User Community Live. And I'll attach that to our change category. Hit save, and perfect. We have a category and we have the process definition attached to it. So I'll close out of here, and now I should be able to create a new change order, attach it to that category, and this will kick off an instance of our process definition. So I'll have a look here at all of our change categories. In this instance, we did User Community Live. I'm going to enter in a quick summary and a quick description. And as soon as I hit save, it's going to kick off our workflow. So long as the workflow completes without error, I can actually go to our additional information, our workflow task tab, and I will see here that our test process 1 is completed. It sees 4 records. It shows that it's, these are activity logs based upon what was done in the process. But it looks like it worked fine. However, if we go to the Logs tab, we will see that there's no activity logs entered into change order number 810. And it's exactly what Brett had mentioned earlier, is the fact that we had hard-coded change order number 806 into the process. So therefore, if we check change order number 806 and we refresh the screen, there is where we should see our activity logs. And we see one more log entry as of 11:48, which is 1 minute ago, so that means it worked flawlessly. Okay, so before we move on, we just created a workflow in PAM. We created a start request form and then relaunched the same workflow in PAM. And then we took that start request form, we attached it to a change category, and we launched the workflow from within a change order. We were able to do that in about, I don't remember when we started this, but I would have to say that it can't be very much longer than 15 or 20 minutes. So very easy to do that if you're using the Service Desk Connector. In the PowerPoint presentation that I have created that corresponds to this demo, I've outlined all the steps that I've taken. It includes screenshots and pretty red arrows and everything. So if you want to try this in your own environment, feel free to do so. Everything is clearly documented in the presentation. And I can also send everybody an extract of what we did because I backed up the process definition and the start request form to an XML file. I'd be happy to send that out for anybody that wants to import it and then run a quick test in your own environment. So before I move on, are there any questions on the lab?
And again, if you would like to ask a question, press *1. And there are no questions.
Okay. So just getting back to the PowerPoint. You have to use the CA Service Desk connector to integrate Service Desk Manager and CA Process Automation, and the answer to that is no, which is a perfect segue into our next topic that follows this slide. In the Service Desk Manager Integration Screenbook, Volume 3, it's published on support.ca.com, and I've also included a hyperlink in the last slide of this presentation. We have a chapter on CA Process Automation, and within that chapter we talk about some of the best practices that we found in our experience on defining these process definitions with Service Desk. So one of the sections, and I've even noted the page here, is the pros and cons of leveraging, I have here the Service Desk operators, but it's really the Service Desk connector. So one of the things to be careful of is that the Service Desk connector, as we saw, makes using PAM extremely simple. You don't need to know the web services code. You don't need to know the variables that you have to input to each one of the operators. You don't need to know how to parse XML, because we've wrapped all of that complexity around the connectors. So that's all missing, and it makes it very easy to use. However, that does come at a cost. So I recommend for customers, if you're going to use a connector, use it for when you're getting yourself familiar with PAM. Get used to the interface, get used to saving a process definition, checking it in, creating start request forms. Use that as your basis to learn the tool. Use the connector if you aren't running an extreme amount of heavy load in your environment, if you're not running a ton of workflows. And here's why. If you noticed when we created our process definition, it took us one operator to log a comment within Service Desk, which that one operator obviously has to make a web service call into Service Desk to log that comment. Before we make that call, two other calls need to happen. You first need to log into the web services, and then you need to log out. But if you notice when we created our process definition using the connector, we only used one node, or one operator. So within that one operator, we hid the complexity of doing a web services login, obtaining a session ID, passing that session ID to a subsequent web service call, which is logging an activity log to a change order, and then we logged out of the web services. So all that happened in one operator. Now, if you multiply this by, I don't know, 50 operators for your process definition, if you use the connector, that means that for every single operation that's done, you're going to be logging in, performing the operation, and logging out of web services. So that means 3 web service calls for every operation that needs to be done. If you, which is fine, but if you multiply this by a lot, if you have a lot of operators running in your environment, if you're using this with heavy load, if you have a ton of change orders that are leveraging this capability, it's going to be placing a load on the environment that is not necessary. So this is definitely one of the things to consider when you're building out your process definitions. This is all documented in the Green Book. So feel free to have a look here. There's a ton more information on it. An alternative to using the connector is to leverage basic SOAP operators and basic SOAP web service calls to create your process definition, which segues into the next topic of, do we have any sample process definitions out of box that do not leverage the Service Desk connector? And the answer to that is yes. And so from here we'll go in and we'll talk about that. If you navigate to, actually let me close out of here and I'll go into the environment live. If you go into PAM, and here I have a folder, SDM, and beneath that folder I have a number of different subfolders. You can see I have processes, SRF, IRS are, for some reason I'm blanking on the name that we use for CA workflow, but it's basically an interaction form. And this would be the tool that you use to prompt a form to whoever's, submitting or approving a change order, to give them a series of questions for them to answer as a part of the approval process. These are interaction request forms. All of these sample process definitions that are beneath this folder use a different technique other than the service desk connector. And if I drill down here, if any of these look familiar to those of you running CA workflow, with the exception of the top one, which is one that we're currently building, the remainder of these are all process definitions that we had available in CA workflow that we manually converted to workflows to be used with CA process automation. So the exact same steps are followed. The process definitions look exactly the same, except now they're in process automation and not CA workflow. This can be a huge help for those of you who are using CA workflow who are not familiar with PAM, to do kind of that one-to-one correlation to how does the process definition look in CA workflow versus how should it look in PAM. So if I take our example change management process definition, again, this is the same stuff that we had as samples in CA workflow, except now it's available in PAM. And we'll just give that a second to pop up. So if at any point, again, you want to have a look at what it looks like in CA workflow versus what it looks like here, this is the exact same process definition except in PAM. So now any of the samples that are provided in this directory take a different approach, as I had mentioned, than using the service desk connector. So what this does is it makes one initial login to the CA Service Desk Manager web services. From that login, it obtains a session ID. It will continue down the path of going through each and every one of these operators until the session ID expires. So that session ID is going to be reused until it absolutely cannot reuse it anymore. Once the session ID has expired, we have built in exception handling into the process definition such that it will re-log in to the web services, obtain another session ID, and move forward with the process. So the only time it's going to be making subsequent web services logins is when we don't have a session ID to reuse. So that cuts down a significant amount of web services calls made into Service Desk. So feel free to have a look at those. I know for me, there were definitely, it was definitely a good process when we went through and we made that conversion. It helped me to get much more familiar with the tool. These are not installed with PAM out of box. The process definitions are there. We have complete documentation on all of them, and I'll bring up the doc that corresponds to this. So the documentation includes where to find these, and post-installation, these are under NX-Root samples in a directory called CA PAM workflows. This will go through, it will tell you how to configure it, how to import it, how to even go as far as how to integrate Service Desk with process automation just from the start. Then it goes through instructions on how to configure the different workflows, what they look in design view and process automation. And it also goes through a demo. Right now, this is using a previous version of Service Desk and a previous version of PAM. I personally am working on updating this document to leverage Service Desk 12.9 and PAM 4.1 SP1. So as soon as that document is available, I'll let Christy know, and we'll see if we can get it distributed to the team. But for the most part, the demo remains exactly the same. So it literally walks you through the different approval steps and what it looks like to actually run this process definition. So once you have it set up, how do you test it? And hopefully this will familiarize everybody with the interface as well. And now that you see it working, you can go back and kind of cross-reference that to the existing process definition. So all of that is fully documented. Any questions on that?
Go ahead. We have a question in the Q&A. Can we modify the PAM home screen to change or remove the portlets? For example, the top left portlet with view tutorials, etc.
Oh, I'm sure that you can. I know what you're talking about. Coming up here, getting rid of this stuff.
Yeah, customizing the portlet so they can do it the way, view what they need and use most.
I'm sure that you can. I don't have steps on how to do that, but I can get them over to Christine to send out. But I'm sure that there's a way to add or remove to these if you either want to use them or you don't. But I'll get those instructions over.
Thank you.
Sure.
And again, if you would like to ask a question, press *1. And you have a question from Brett Dipkin.
Hi, Brett.
Hello again. I have a couple questions. I'm going to throw them at you, and you can answer how you need to. I had, a long time ago, demoed 2.1, and I know it's changed a lot since then. From a form interface, is there any integrations now with the tabs in the service desk, or is it still launching it externally?
Meaning, can you view, do you mean like we had with CA Workflow where you could click on that button in the Workflow Test tab and it will show you the running instance?
Not necessarily that, but you know how you can, in Service Test, you can configure the resources and put a tab at the top for each resource, like Service Desk, Change Calendar, etc.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We don't have that available and configured out of box, and I'm not certain that there's a way for you to add that. But what is the ask though? So in other words, what would the information be that you would like to see on that tab?
Right now, what we're doing with Advanced Workflow or CA Workflow is a couple processes that have form interface. So people go in and answer questions, and then it takes background logic and does things to the ticket. If I want them to stay within the same interface, and just open the form and fill out what they're required to do, and then go back to their work, it'd be nice to keep it all in the one app.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So basically a method for users to do whatever it is that they need to do with tasks, but not leave Service Desk.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, right now we don't have that out of box. I've heard of different things in the field that were done to get around that, but nothing that we have available when you install the product. So is it something that services would likely be able to do? Yes, but is it available out of box? No.
Okay. The second one, you had mentioned that the operators are basically bundled web services.
Mm-hmm.
How do they handle failures?
That is a good question. Let's log in and we'll look at our process. I'm not sure that any exception handling is built into this. So it's to my understanding that this is, I mean, just from an operator perspective with the connector, that this is fire and, not fire and forget, but it's going to launch it. And if there's an error that occurs, I don't believe that there's anything built into exception handling to, you know, send an email to the administrator or notify whomever. I believe that that's something that you would need to add into the process definition yourself, depending on whatever your business process is. You absolutely can do that, that's highly configurable. And that's from a connector perspective. If we take the flip side and we talk about the sample process definitions that we converted from CA Workflow to PAM that are available out of box that are not leveraging the connector, those process definitions do have exception handling built in, as I had mentioned, where they reuse the session ID. Once it expires, they relog into web services. I also believe that we have something built in there to send off an email to the administrator, you know, if something fails, but I believe that we have more exception handling built into that than we have in the operators that are available with the service desk connector.
Okay. And the third one, which might be jumping ahead, in CA Workflow, if you have the ability to bundle multiple sort of objects, I forget what they call, the little green boxes and whatever, into a collapsible version. So from a design perspective, you could say this one box under the covers has 12 steps, but I just want to see it once and open it when needed. Does that functionality exist now in version 4? Because I know it didn't in version 2.
I know exactly what you're saying. You're talking about that little plus sign that was there over the node that you clicked on?
Yes.
And then you could drill down, yeah. I do not believe that that is available. What you can do is you do have the ability to call a sub-process from a main process, but the issue that you're going to face there is when you drill down, you're not going to drill down into that sub-process definition. You're going to drill down into the call that's made to the process definition. So if you want to view the details, you have to actually physically go to that sub-process that's being invoked. So no, I don't believe that capability has changed in PAM4 at all. However, that would be an excellent enhancement request.
Okay. Yeah, I had mentioned that to them back in version 2.
Okay. Yeah, I could also talk to product management and see if that's something that they're considering for future, because I think that would be excellent, because, I mean, I did make use of that capability a lot in CA Workflow, so I understand where you're coming from on that.
Okay. That's all I got for now. Thanks.
Okay.
We have no further questions.
Okay, so just one more slide left in the PowerPoint. And this is where to find more information. So again, we'll make sure that this PowerPoint gets distributed to everybody. With some documents to look over as you're going down this road of moving over from workflow to CA process automation, make sure that you read this, because it's going to, everything in here, because it's going to make it a lot easier. There's no reason to try to start from scratch or to reinvent the wheel when we have tools that will help you get from point A to point B. So one of the first documents that you will definitely find helpful is the one that I just had up on the screen, which is the documentation around the sample workflows that we converted from CA Workflow to process automation. It goes through configuration steps, how-tos, and demos. And it also talks about how to integrate and how to import the sample process definitions. The next, and I did make brief mention of this, is the Service Desk Integrations Greenbook, Volume 3. Chapter 4 is CA Process Automation, and this includes a wealth of information on any kind of best practices that we have found, integrating the two applications together and building your process definition. So a lot of cool stuff in there. Make sure you have a look. And finally, the CA Process Automation Best Practices page on support.ca.com. I think that I have that up and running. And this page here will give you access to a number of different connectors that you can download. Note that Service Desk is not available here, but as I mentioned, we are working on getting that posted to the Service Desk Manager homepage. But there are other connectors here. There are tutorials. There's web services utilities, a wealth of best practices information, other resources that you can get to for CA process automation itself. So there's a ton of information here as well for you to leverage. as you're building these out. And that wraps up all I had planned. So I guess before we end, are there any further questions?
And again, if you would like to ask a question, press *1. And we have no questions.
Okay, I guess Christine or Chris or anybody else with the first thing that partially starts with Chris.
we have several Chris's on the call today, so versions of that. So we've been making a joke about that. No, I just wanted to say this PowerPoint, this session was being recorded, and the PowerPoint will be available on the user group website. It's usually up within about a week of the actual presentation. So if you have team members that might get help from this, or you want to get the links that she's put up here, for these implementation best practices, those types of things, you'll be able to grab them off the user group website. Another resource that's available that you might want to look into taking advantage of also is there's actually a user group which is called the CA Process Automation Community. If you go out to the user group website, which you can get to off of your support page, you can find that group and also join that. And they have, postings and ideas pages and stuff like that, and it centers around this tool. So it's a good resource. Sometimes even when you're not necessarily have a service desk or a service catalog question, but it's more around usage of IP PAM or of this tool. They have good information, so that's another resource that you can use to do this. And I know everybody, especially those of us who have had these products for a long time, are having to go through the pain of conversion. My company's going through it one right now. One suggestion I can make, based on what we've done here, and we cut our effort to convert things significantly, was we've created a larger generic and fulfillment workflow. When we looked at all these individual workflows that we had out there, we realized they all followed of like 7 general paths to get approval or to go through a fulfillment. So what we did was we just took the time and built these larger workflows, and we were able to knock out about 80% of the workflows that we needed to move over by just creating a couple of big general workflows based on lessons learned. Because for some of us that have been customers for a long time, there was stuff that we did in the beginning that we would go back and do differently, if we had the chance to today. So we took that opportunity, mapped those things out, and were able to significantly reduce the effort to move things over by just coming up with those couple of workflows based on what we knew about our existing workflows. And just to give you an idea, in CA workflow, we probably had about 213 workflows in there, so it was a daunting task, but once we did that, it brought it down to something that was reasonable for us. So that's just, from my experience, just some words of wisdom that might help. Does anybody have any other questions?
You do have a question from Sharon Myrick.
Oh, she already answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and we've put a survey or poll up here. If you could just take a moment to fill that out and provide your feedback. And if you have anything you'd like to see in future webcasts, please feel free to go out to the user. We do monitor the message boards out on the user group sites. Go ahead and post something out there, or feel free to contact me directly. My information's up on the user group community board. We're always looking, or if you have something that you've done that you think the group would be interested in, we're happy to have people who are not with CA to present also. So, okay, we'll go ahead and close the call today. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.